So anyway, good morning. My name is Eric. I'm the lead pastor here. If you're a guest here, just want to welcome you. You might be on vacation. We had some people from Minnesota who've come down for this warm weather that we have down in Florida, and maybe that's you. Because the Minnesotans are like, this is great. We're wearing shorts, But for us Floridians, it's freezing. So we just want to welcome you. Also want to welcome those that are watching online. Pastor A.G., he's probably freezing up in Buffalo, New York, but we're glad that you're here as well. And so we're going to continue our series that we kind of kicked off last week. We kicked it off January 7th, and then it's kind of a series that we revisit throughout the year. So this is the second week in a row that we're talking about God's way. And what we decided this year in 2024, that we were going to ask this question, kind of a guiding question to help us throughout the year, no matter what we're facing. Am I going to choose God's way, or am I going to choose my way? Am I going to, in every area of life, every different area of life, am I going to choose my way, or am I going to choose God's way? Whether it be professionally, whether it be financially, or maybe even relationally. Maybe you're here this morning, or maybe, this is what happened to you. Somebody hurt you a long time ago, maybe betrayed you, stabbed you in the back, whatever it is, and you're still hurt. And then you come to church, and then Pastor Graham is talking about which rock are you holding, right? And he says, are you holding the rock of unforgiveness that you kind of hurl in your mind every time you think of them? Or are you picking up the rock that builds a monument of God's grace and forgiveness? And when that happens, you're standing there at a service like that, you don't want to choose God's way. You don't want, I like holding my rock. You're fighting it when Graham talks about forgiveness and grace. I like holding a grudge because I want to hold on to it. And to be honest with you, my way feels good to me, right? Doesn't it feel good to hold a grudge? Because you feel like you've got something on them. It feels good to put my needs ahead of other people's. It feels good to put my wants in front of other people. It feels good to sleep in instead of coming to church, or sleep around, smashing for you young people. It feels good to do those things, right? Because my way is easier than God's way. God's way is always more difficult. When we're faced with this choice, am I going to choose my way or going to choose God's way? A lot of times we go my way because it's just easier. It's just simple. It's like the lazy river at Big Kahuna's. You float down the river, it's so easy, but you ever try to go against it? You've been to Big Kahuna's, one person, right? You ever go against it? It's tough. It's harder to do that. Now, what I hope to do today is to give you some inspiration on why you choose God's way. Now, the good news is that we aren't supposed to just drop everything. It's not expected of us, that because of the mentality of following Jesus is that you're just supposed to chuck everything, drop everything, and begin to follow Jesus, just, go all in, which is a big step for people to make. And the truth is, you don't have to do that. Last week, we looked at a story of when the very first disciples were faced with this decision. Now, if you look at Matthew's account of this story, which Matthew wrote a book of the gospel. The gospels are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all written by different people on the accounts of Jesus' life. So when Jesus first calls his disciples in Matthew, it looks like this. Jesus is walking down the Sea of Galilee, or walking on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, sees some guys cleaning their nets because they were fishermen. And he says, hey, follow me. And it says they dropped everything and followed him. And you look at that, it looks like one of those decisions that you have to go from 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds. Like, you just got to give it your all. And sometimes that's the message of Christianity. Oh, don't ask questions, just believe, like a blind faith. But Luke tells the story, and he tells it differently. He says there were a lot more what looked like insignificant decisions that the disciples had to make before they got to that all-in moment. In fact, the first disciples started with just the decision to follow Jesus started with this simple decision to sit and listen to him teach. While they were cleaning their nets, Luke tells us that the disciples, or these men that became the disciples because they were fishermen, were on the beach next to him listening to him teach. And for some of you, that's where you are. Just by being here today and listening, or by listening online, you have chosen, instead of sleeping in, you've chosen God's way. The next step, we said, was to loan him your boat. And when we look at that story, after Jesus had sat in Peter's boat, or after Jesus was teaching on the beach, he decided, because it was so crowded, he wanted to borrow Peter's boat. And so what he was saying was, can I borrow your boat for a moment? In other words, can I inconvenience you for a little bit of your time to do something? And for some of you, that's exactly where you are. Some of you, you went from sitting and listening and you decided, I'm going to give God a little bit of my time and get my questions answered, and you signed up for Rooted. We had the biggest Rooted class ever of 125 people on this last Tuesday. But 45 of you signed up last Sunday. So that meant you said, I'm ready to move from sitting and listening to loaning my boat. Some of you men decided to go to that men's retreat. We had 54 men at that retreat because men decided, I'm done with sitting and listening. Now I want to move out a little bit more and give God a little bit of time to show himself real to me. Some of you, you're at the next stage, and that is it's time to take Jesus fishing. After Jesus had finished teaching the people, he tells Simon Peter, launch out into the deep, push out into the deep. He says, I want you to take me fishing, even though you've been fishing all night. When you're supposed to, I want you to take me fishing in the middle of the day. And what Jesus was saying, Peter, I want you to do something that you've done thousands of times before, but I want you to do it a different way. I want you to trust me that if you will just give me this one little place in your life that you've been doing it the same way all your life, if you'll do it my way, it'll be an opportunity for me to show you show myself strong in your life. And some of you, that's where you are. You've sat and you've listened. You've inconvenienced yourself. Maybe you went to Rooted. Maybe you went to the men's retreat. And now God he's asking you to give him something that you've been doing your way for so long and do it differently, to do it his way. And we said for that it was probably going to have something to do with your relationships or your profession or your money. Now, I'm not going to lie, because I'm a pastor. We don't do that up here. I am going to talk a little bit about money today. Not much, just I'm going to bring some money into it, but I don't want that to distract you from the overarching message that we're going to talk about today, because in the end, when we're choosing God's way, it's not about your money. It's not about your relationships. It's really not about your profession or whatever it is. You decide to say, God, I'm going to try this one area, because when he shows himself strong and you learn that you can trust him, it's more than that. So what I want to do to kick it off, I want to do something that we don't normally do, and I want to read from the Bible. What I mean by that is I want to read a whole chapter of the Bible. A lot of times we just pick out a little section and talk to you about it, but I want to do something. I want to read a whole chapter. And so if this is your first time back in church, or you haven't been to church in a long time, I think this is a perfect Sunday, I hope, for you to be here, right? Now, this chapter, the reason why this chapter is so good is because this is not an ordinary chapter. For one, it's not a Bible story. Because many times you read the Old Testament, and you read stories in the Bible, and you go, the guy was in the belly of a whale for 3 days, and he was still alive? I don't know. Or, parted the Red Sea. See, the reason why this book is so unique is because there's no miracles in this book. This book is really a history book. It's a history story. It's about a Jewish man who did something so extraordinary that the Jewish people valued what he did so much that they included it into their scriptures of what we call, which was eventually added to our Bible, we call it the Old Testament. Now, the story is about an extraordinary leader who does something extraordinary because, again, no miracles. And so this book is called Nehemiah. It's found in the Old Testament. And the reason why it's inspirational because it's about hope. It's about hard work. It's about discipline. And it's especially about vision. Very powerful stuff. So what I'm going to do to set this up, I'm going to read to you an entire chapter, the very first chapter of this ancient document that we call the book of Nehemiah. Now, this takes place in what is right after what is called the Jewish exile, okay? And little history lesson for you. In about 605 BC, the Babylonians invade Judah. Now, we got a little map for you. We had this up here last week. It'll kind of explain this, okay? So in the bottom, you see in the bottom it says Judea, and up at the top it says Samaria. At one time, all the 12 tribes of Israel were like one country, but they kind of had a civil war after David was king and Solomon was king, and so they split. And so the upper area where Samaria is was called Israel, and down here where Jerusalem is was called Judea, okay? So around 605 BC, Babylon, they'd already taken Israel. Now Babylon invades Judea. They invade Judah and specifically the city of Jerusalem. And if you remember the story, anybody remember the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Daniel, that whole story in the Old Testament, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the three Hebrew boys. That's what happened was King Nebuchadnezzar invades Jerusalem and takes these people captive and brings them back to Babylon. Then Babylon is then conquered by Persia. So Cyrus, the leader of Persia, he takes over the area, and he looks around and says, hey, there are a lot of Jewish people who live here. Where'd they come from? So he makes this proclamation. This is 70 years after Babylon had done this, and he makes this proclamation. He says, hey, if the Babylons took you captive and took you from your home and you want to go back there, you have my permission to go back there. So a lot of the Jews begin to migrate back to Jerusalem, and over time, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Jewish people are trying to get the city up and going, crank up the economy, get the temple going and everything like that, but it's not going well. For one, they'd been gone so long, everything's run down, the walls are broken down, the gates are broken down, and the other thing is that when Nebuchadnezzar, what he did was when he conquered a city, instead of killing everybody or making everybody slaves, he would find the most educated, the wisest, the wealthy, and he would bring them back and put them in positions in Babylon and hopefully indoctrinate them into their culture, right? So a lot of the best people were taken captive. And other people had moved in that vacancy. Other people had moved into Jerusalem and the surrounding area. And suddenly Jews are moving back by the thousands. And people are going, hey, you don't have any right to come back here. You just can't come back here and claim this city as yours. And, so that's what's going on. About 90 years after this is when we meet Nehemiah. Now, we're not sure if Nehemiah had ever been to Jerusalem. Most people don't think so because of the time span. He had to have been born somewhere in captivity. But we do know that he was a servant to the king of Persia called King Artaxerxes. And what Nehemiah does is he begins to journal his story. And we have this story. He writes it all down, and it's this ancient document that now we have in our Bible called Nehemiah. So I'm going to read through this thing, and then I'm going to challenge us as a church. And if you're here this morning and this isn't your church, you're off the hook. You get to laugh while the rest of us are squirming, right? And then we're going to talk about this next week, okay? So I'm going to pick it up, Nehemiah chapter 1. If you've got your phone and you have an app, you can open up the app, you'll see service notes, and you can go follow along with me, or we'll have the scriptures up here. Now, they are a lot of Jewish words, so I'm not going to pronounce them, Jewishly. I'm going to use Southern Hebrew, all right? I'm combining the way we talk in the South with the Hebrew. And here we go. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the city, or the citadel of Susa. So this is basically, he's kind of setting up history. Like, in other words, when I write this document, here's how you can prove this has happened. This is real history. This is the year. This is the capital. Well, they didn't really have capitals back then. Just this was, if Susa was kind of the capital was wherever the king lived, okay? And this is where the king lived. He says, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men. And I questioned them about the Jewish remnant. Now, remember, the remnant is the people that were left in Jerusalem that never were taken into captivity. And then over the last 90 years, people have been migrating back there. So they were called the remnant that were still left there in Jerusalem. So I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile. The exile was when they were taken captive. And also about Jerusalem. So he's basically asking these guys, they come back from Jerusalem, and he's saying, how's it going? How's it going there? And are we a nation again? And they said to me, this is what they said, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down. And when your walls of a city are broken down and the gates have been burned by fire, you're not protected. So basically he's saying, look, how's it going back in Jerusalem? And they're like, things aren't good. There's a lot of people that are back there. More and more people are coming back there every day, but it's no good. We've got no walls to protect us. We've got no gates. Our pets' heads are falling off, right? The people around there, they don't want us there. They're giving us lots of trouble. And then this next statement that Nehemiah makes is so powerful. He says, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. In other words, for Nehemiah, it wasn't just news. It wasn't just like, oh, man, that's too bad, bummer. Yeah, I'll pray for you guys. Yeah, that's too bad. I'd love to do something, but I live in Susa. I live so far away, I can't go back there. I have a great job. I've got a family. I work for the king. And now I'll tell you what I can do because I have a good position. I make good money. I work for the most powerful, king in the world, the most powerful country. I can write you a check. See, that wasn't his response. When he found out what was going on, it broke his heart. It broke his heart, and he began to weep. He says, for some days, I mourned and I fasted, and I prayed before the God of heaven. And then I said, and he journals his prayer for this city, for this country that he probably had never even visited. He says, for some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Then I said, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. And so basically Nehemiah is reminding God of the promises he made. He says, listen, God, you remember your promises. And he uses the word covenant, okay? Covenant, so we have a Bible study going on right now on Monday nights on the book of Nehemiah. So we know what a covenant is. A covenant is basically a contract. It's a contract between two parties. And he's saying, look, Lord, you made a covenant, the one who keeps his contract, he keeps his covenant. So, and he mentions the commandments too. Remember commandments back in the Old Testament? Basically, God set up this somewhat conditional agreement with Israel and said this. He goes, look, if you will keep my laws, if you'll listen to, keep the 10 commandments, keep those laws, what I'll do, if you keep them, I'll let you stay in the land. But if you break my laws and you begin to abandon me and you're no longer a light to the world, I'm just going to step back. And I'm going to allow the nations to come and invade you, and I'm going to allow the land to be taken from you, and you'll be taken captive to these other nations. So Nehemiah is reminding God of those covenants. He says, you're the one that keeps these covenants and keeps the commandments. Let your ears be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. And then he does something interesting. He says, I confess the sins that we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. In other words, here's what he's saying. God, we deserve to be thrown out of the land. We broke the agreement. We broke the covenant. You were perfectly within your rights to have this happen to us. We broke the commandments. Our forefathers broke them before us. And so you're exactly right. He says, we have not obeyed the commands. Did I just read that? Okay, we have not obeyed the commands and the decrees and the laws you gave your servant Moses. Oh yeah, here you go. Remember the instructions you gave your servant Moses? And I kind of love this because he's going to quote back to God what God had said. Do you remember when you said this? Yeah, I'm God. I remember those things. He says, remember when you said this? He said, you said, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then, wait, let me just stop there for a minute. Think about this. God tells Israel years and years, thousands of years, if you will keep my commands, you're going to stay in the land. But if you don't, this is what's going to happen. And here we are, years later, and this is what's happened. They've been scattered to the nations for the last 90 years. So he says, but if you will return to me, come back and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, this is what God told Moses, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place that I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. Because Israel was God's chosen nation. And the city of Jerusalem was precious to God because there was the temple there. It was precious to the people. That's where it housed the temple, that housed the Holy of Holies, where they believed the presence of God actually lived at one time. He says, they are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. He's saying, and I love that word redeemed. That redeemed means to buy back, right? I grew up here, and anybody grow up here long enough to remember when the bridge in Navarre was a toll bridge? Anybody remember that? You remember how expensive that toll was? It was a quarter, 25 cents to drive over to the beach. I remember times in high school, we're going to go surfing in Navarre, and we don't even have a quarter. And so we would drive along the road looking for Coke bottles that people threw out because you could redeem them. You could take them to the junior food store for a nickel. And we're like, we got 4 bottles. We need 1 more. And what are you doing? The store would redeem them or buy them back, all right? And this is what he's saying. God, you remember the whole Moses and Egypt thing, the plagues, and let my people go, right? You remember that, right? Yeah. Well, you went to great trouble to redeem your people, to buy your people out of slavery, to get them back. Well, now your people are scattered all over the area, all over the world. Would you be willing to do that again? Would you be willing to redeem or buy back your people once again? And then he kind of finishes up in verse 11. He says, so Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. He says, give your servant success today. He's talking about himself. Give your servant success today and favor in the presence of this man. And basically what he's doing is he's praying this prayer. He says, listen, he has a great job. I mean, Nehemiah works for the king. He is a cupbearer to the king. That means before the king drinks anything, Nehemiah tastes it first to make sure it's not poisonous. And if Nehemiah doesn't drop dead, then the king can drink it. So you have to have somebody you completely trust. So Nehemiah has a great job, but now he has because he works in the palace, man. He works for the most powerful person in the world. He has everything that he needs. He probably has a good salary, all of those things, but now he has a choice to make. Because he gets a message that the city of his forefathers, maybe a city that he's never even been there, lies in ruins, and it breaks his heart. And his choice is, am I going to stay here and go my way because my way's comfortable? I've got a great job. Or am I going to stretch myself? Am I going to be courageous? Am I going to step out and be daring and go God's way? Because he is about to go, and that's why he's asking for favor. He says, Lord, give me favor in the presence of this man, because he's about to go into the presence of the king and say, hey, king, would you mind if I had a leave of absence, indefinite leave of absence? What for? Well, I want to go back to my homeland. You know, Jerusalem, that at one time used to be the most powerful country in the world, and then Babylon came and conquered it. You know, that one. I want to go back and rebuild the walls and rebuild the city and get the economy going again so that we can be a country again. You didn't do that. I mean, for one, you didn't talk to the king unless the king talked to you. You didn't ask the questions. The king asked the question. You definitely didn't go in and say, hey, I want to rebuild a city that used to be a thorn in your side. But he does it. See, Nehemiah's heart was broken. He couldn't just stand there and go, well, I'll write a check. He says he felt, because his heart was broken, he felt compelled to do something. He felt compelled to act on what he'd heard. What he'd heard was so destroyed his heart that he had to do something. And then I love how it ends. The end of verse 11 says, and I was a cupbearer to the king. So here's my question for us, and it's kind of like the question that we're asking for the year. I don't expect that we're going to answer it today or next week, because we're going to talk about this again next week, but maybe throughout the year. But I think corporately we can get an answer to this. And the question is, how far are we willing to go to choose God's way? To what extent are we willing to go? I mean, look at what Nehemiah did. He took a chance with his own life because he was so compelled by the vision that he decided to go in and talk to the king. And so my question is, how far are we willing to go to choose God's way? When you look around at your community, when you look around in your own neighborhood, when you look around in the city of Destin or Fort Walton or Okaloosa County, when you look at the economy or the state of our school systems in the country, when you look at the immigration that's going on, all of that stuff, when you look at what's happening with our children, what's happening with our teenagers, what's happening with our young adults, when you see what's happening with the world, with politics, when you see what's happening with the state of the college football playoff system, what captures your heart? What breaks your heart? I know the college football system breaks my heart. But what breaks your heart? In other words, what is it that you just can't get off your mind? What is it that you just can't stop thinking about? In fact, you try not to think about it, because if you do think about it, you get frustrated because there's nothing you can do about it. Years ago, there was a movie that came out called Blood Diamond with Leonardo DiCaprio. Anybody remember that movie? And it was about the illegal diamond trade in Africa and the children soldiers that was happening in the countries then. And it just destroyed me so much that I went and read the book. And when I read the book, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. But then it's frustrating because then you go, there's nothing I can do about it. I have a job. I have a family. I've got a church that I've got to run. And I'm not connected. I've never been to Africa. I don't have the resources. It's too far away. But I can't stop thinking about this because every time I think about it, it just consumes me. So then I choose not to think about it because I can't do anything about it. So my question is, what breaks your heart? This is a dangerous question. What breaks your heart? What breaks your heart that causes you, to go, instead of saying somebody needs to do something about this or something needs to be done about this, it causes you to go, what can I do about this? What if we asked that question instead of saying, well, something needs to be done about this? What if we said, what can I do about this? Because if you really want to make the world if we really want to make the world a better place, then we have to start with what's in front of us. I can't change the world, but I can change what's in front of me. I can change the opportunities that God has given me. So if we want to make the world a better place, we have to start with what's in front of us. It's kind of like the old Latin proverb, what man is a man who does not leave the world a better place? Now, when we started this church, if you weren't here last week was our 19th anniversary as a church. We started this church on Super Bowl Sunday 19 years ago when the Patriots beat the Philadelphia Eagles, right? When we started this church, this story inspired us because this story is about vision. And do you know what vision is? Vision is seeing things how they are and saying, no, this is how it should be. Vision is looking at something that breaks your heart and go, this is what's happening in Jerusalem right now, but this is how it should be. This is what's happening in Destin. This is what's happening in our country. This is what's happening in the world. This is what's happening with politics. And this is what's happening, but this is how it should look. This is how it looks now, but this is how it should look. And so Nehemiah has a vision. This is the state of Jerusalem, but it shouldn't be that way. It should be this way. And now he's compelled by this vision. So everything he does should line up with this vision because it's all about taking what you see and making it how it should be. That's what vision is. In fact, this story so inspired us. Years ago when we were starting Shoreline, we saw the perception that many people had of God. And much of the perception that people had of God was wrong when you compared it to what Jesus said. I've got a buddy that I go fishing with. We do a lot of fishing trips, and all the time we joke around because I invite him to church, and the only thing he'll come to is a fly fishing film tour because he's a fisherman. But he says, here's what he says, and you've probably heard this when you invite someone to church. If I walked into church, you know what would happen? Lightning would strike, right? That God is so mad at you that if you came to the holy place of Nighttown, that lightning would strike. I'm like, are you kidding me? Do you know what happened in this building before? Your stuff is nothing. Yeah, right? So the perception was wrong, especially when you compared to what Jesus said. He said, you want to know what the Father looks like? Here's what the Father looks like. If you've seen me, here's the Father. Jesus ate with sinners. He welcomed everybody. He was an advocate of the downtrodden, that's the way he was, and that doesn't match their perception. And so we wanted to change people's perception of God, but first we had to get past this perception of church. And that was very difficult because the church is not us, but the big C, the big church is what has perpetrated this misperception about who God was. So this became the vision that drove us, is that we wanted to change people's perception of God to what it should be, but in order to do that, we had to change their perception of church. So we bought a nightclub and put a slide in it, right? So now, here's what I know about you. The people that you admire the most, the people you tell your kids about, the people that you read their books or their biographies or you watch their movies, it's not the people who are able to, lose 40 pounds or maintain their ideal weight, okay? That's great, okay? It's not the people that, wow, that guy got out of $12,000 of credit card debt in 1 year, and now he's debt-free. I want to be like him. That's awesome. You should do that, but that's not who inspires you. That's not who you're inspired about. It's important. I mean, if you're in debt, you should get out of debt. And some of you need to lose some weight. A lot of you need to lose some weight. A lot of us need to lose some weight, right? Some of us, we should quit drinking so much. Those are all good things. But that's not what inspires you. You know what inspires you? What inspires you are the Braveheart and the Patriot and other Mel Gibson movies where you're like, you can take my land and you can take our wives, but you'll never take our freedom, right? Is it wives or lives? I was always inspired that you could take my wife, but you'll never take my freedom, because that's where I lost a lot of my freedom when I got married. No, I'm just kidding. It's lives? Okay. Or my wife wouldn't be inspired by that. She might be inspired by the Reese Witherspoon movie, Wild, where she hikes the Pacific Coast Trail, after a lot of trauma in her life, right? But that's what inspires us. The people that change things, people who make the world a better place, or people who make someone else's world a better place. And here's the thing. Every one of us in here have the potential to change the world. Everyone in this room, everyone watching online, we have the potential to change the world. And as we're going to find out today and next week, it's only when we do it together. Together, we have the potential to change the world. Together, we have the potential to change our community. Together, we have the potential to change somebody else's world. We have the potential to make someone else's world a better place. Now, here's what else I know, especially this year. If we don't do this, you know what's going to happen? I'll tell you what's going to happen, especially this year, 2024. You know what 2024 is? I don't hate the year, but I hate what's happening this year. Happens every 4 years. The election. I hate election years, don't you? I hate the negativity, the trash, the garbage throwing, the division that happens in our country. And so here's what will happen. If we don't put our eyes on something like this, a project or things, the vision that God has given us to carry out in the world, in our community, in our country, you know what we'll do? We'll sit around and we'll watch TV and we'll watch the news and we'll begin to blame. And we'll blame everybody. We'll blame everything. And here's what you know. People who blame things don't change things. I mean, you guys, you see it all the time on social media. They're quick to blame everything, but they don't do anything about it. See, this is how it works. When there's something that breaks our heart and we see something go, we get all emotional and our defense mechanisms kick in and we go, somebody should do something about that. The government should fix that. Someone needs to fix that. And it'll always be somebody else's fault. It'll always be the president's fault, or Congress' fault, or the PTA, or the city council, or the preacher's fault, or the HOA's fault. It is the HOA's fault. It is. We can blame them for sure. But what we'll do is we'll sit around and watch TV and we'll blame everything. And my question is, what if we took the time and the energy, especially in 2024, when we're asking this question, am I going to choose my way or am I going to choose God's way? Nehemiah was faced with that question, and it would have been so much easier to just go, I can't do anything about this. I've got a great job. I'm comfortable. But he chose to step out. And my question is, what if we took that energy that we use for blaming and we focus it on changing the things that we don't like? Because as long as we're blaming, nothing is changing. Because blaming is not a strategy for change. In fact, blaming is how we avoid change. And that's why we do initiatives. And as I said last week, initiatives are our way that we present every year. In the beginning of the year, we present our initiatives, and they're our way of saying, these are the things that we want to accomplish. These are the things that we want to accomplish by the end of the year to fulfill our mission. Now, we accomplished a major initiative at the end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023 when we raised all the money to pay off this building. And it was a major accomplishment in a short amount of time. In fact, our bank loves us. And, of course, we paid back the loan, but here's why it's hard for churches to get loans because churches get money and then they fold and the people don't get their money back. And our bank loves us because not only did we pay it back, but we paid it back in a quarter of the time that we should have. But here's what I found for me. This is me. It's easy when you do something like that to sit back and be proud of what you accomplished. Man, we paid off this building in 4 short months. We did a capital campaign and we raised the money in 4 months. That's awesome. And we should be proud of that. But my tendency is when I do that, I know that if I stop and rest for too long, I'm going to get comfortable. And I don't want to be stretched again because my way's easier. I want to go my own way. But I said this last week. That's my tendency. That's my default setting. But after years of seeing God's faithfulness, what I've learned to do now is say, God, where do you want me to let down the nets next? If you don't know what that means, you got to listen to last week's message. And that's where our initiatives come in. They allow us to merge our obedience with God's faithfulness. And then we see God, through us, accomplish something that we would not be able to do on our own. And so these initiatives are going to be focused on basically either they're going to be focused on our church, okay? In other words, we're expanding our nets. We've talked about this. I mean, look at this service right now. There's a few empty seats here. First service was just like this, and third service is starting to get full. Our children's ministry, I was in there with your kids during worship. It's full. So we've got to figure out, God, how can we enlarge our nets so that we can pull in more fish? Now, I've just feeling like that's probably going to be one of our initiatives for the fall because we don't have direction on that, but I'm just letting you know that it's going to be either about our church or it's going to be about making a difference in the city we love and the surrounding area. So that's why we continue to do Grub Club, where we feed the people down on the harbors during the summer season. We feed the workers down there. In fact, I told you a story about 3 weeks ago where it was probably 4 weeks ago, right after New Year's. We were at Man Cave Monday. This guy, we just introduced everybody and go, hey, how'd you find, my first time here? And here's what he said. I work down on the docks. It's a new year. I wanted a new me. I thought I'd try church. And when I thought of church, I thought, why don't I try the church that fed me for the last 2 summers? So we're going to continue. Our initiatives are going to be about our community. They're also going to be about developing the next generation of leaders. We talked about that last week, that God has given that a mandate, is to get this next generation of leaders to be able to run this church or any church for the next 20 years. As I'm reaching kind of the end of my career, I got to prepare the next generation. In fact, in 3 weeks, I've got a retreat with a group of pastors from around the country, all young pastors that we're mentoring and we're helping them develop. In fact, we've got a new foundation we call Blue Sky Foundation so that we can do that. And then these initiatives are going to help us fulfill our role in God's global story. This last year, we sent a team to Uganda in the fall because we've done some projects with them where they're building a school. And so part of our initiative is helping finish this school in Lugazi, the capital of Uganda. Darlene and I went to Bali or to Indonesia to a ministry that we've been working with for years. And we've done a lot of projects with them, but COVID shut this place down. It's a youth center where they're reaching teenagers and young people in the country of Indonesia, which is predominantly Muslim and Hindu. And they're reaching young people, but when COVID shut them down, they didn't have anything for 2 years. And so we went there this last year, and it was like looking at the walls of Jerusalem. Things have been broken down after 4 years of not being able to have people come, and they need some help with the roof. And so our initiative is going to have to do with that because I guarantee you every one of our initiatives is going to have something to do with the next generation of kids, the next generation of students, the next generation of leaders. So what if we took all this energy instead of blaming and focused it on what is in front of us? And to change our little slice of the world, or maybe someone else's slice of the world. And what we're going to find out is that one man, Nehemiah, he made the difference because he acted, but it took everyone to finish the wall. He made a difference because he had the courage to do what he did so that he could go back to Jerusalem, but it took everybody to build the wall. And like Nehemiah, it's the same for us, because the things that we want to do are not things that you can do by yourself or that I can do by myself. It takes all of us to accomplish these things. And what we're going to find out, here's a spoiler alert, Nehemiah does go in to see the king. He takes the chance. He goes in and sees the king, and the king gives him permission, and not only gives him permission, says, what do you need? He stocks him with soldiers to make the journey back. He gives him letters to get wood from the lumber yard and all these things so he can have the supplies. And then he heads back, and get this. They get back and they begin to rebuild the walls. And remember, I said before, there's no miracles in this story. It's not like they woke up one morning and little elves came out and built the walls. They built the walls, and it was just people who were inspired by what was possible, inspired by the vision. And get this, if you've ever been to Jerusalem, it's a 5K to go around the walls. They built 5 kilometers, 3 miles of walls in 52 days. Fort Walton says it's going to take 5 years to build the Brooks Bridge. They built it in 52 days. That happened because everybody did what was available in front of them. We're going to look at this story, but they basically said, I live right here. Here's the section of wall. I'll take this. I'll take this wall. I'll take this wall. And they did what was in front of them, and they did their part. And I believe that it's the same for us. I believe that it's the same for us. And now here's the thing. This is a really generous church. I love pastoring this church. You guys don't make it hard. I don't have to spend a lot of time talking and trying to convince you about this because you're so generous. In fact, there's a story. Let me see what time I can tell this story. There's a story in the Old Testament where David, he's not king yet, but he's being chased by Saul, the king, trying to kill him for 7 years. He's on the run, living in caves in the wilderness. And one day he's sitting around with his soldiers around a campfire. He says, man, I just long to one day, I just want to drink the water from the wells of Jerusalem. I haven't been back in years. I just wish I could just, and two of his soldiers look at each other and they kind of sneak out of the fire and they sneak past enemy lines, go back to the city of Jerusalem, sneak in, get water from the well of Jerusalem, go back, and they bring it to him. See, I feel like David because that's the kind of people you are. I just mentioned something and you guys respond. And I don't have to talk about generosity a lot because you're generous, because you understand that when we're generous, what we're doing is we are partnering with God. And when we partner with God, then we can do things that through him that we couldn't do by ourselves. And then he begins to trust us with more worldly riches. And that opens us up to more ministry because we don't have to say no. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to do what Nehemiah did. He fasted and he prayed. We're going to talk about this again next week. And during that time, here this week, I want you don't have to fast food. You just choose something. But here's the challenge that we did at the men's retreat was I challenged the men to take 30 minutes and go just go find someplace quiet. Because sometimes that's all you need is just get that 30 minutes. I'm going to challenge you the same thing. Just turn off the TV this week. Get with your wife, your spouse. Spend some time praying. And just ask God, because next week on Sunday night at 6 p.m., we are having what we call Heart and Soul. And what we're asking you to do, and next Sunday we'll have more details about the initiatives, which is going to be Uganda and Indonesia and maybe a couple other things, right, darling? We'll have those for you Sunday morning. And then Sunday night, we're going to worship God. We're going to celebrate. We've got some big news we want to announce to you as well. We're going to celebrate. We're going to worship God. And we're going to come with our gifts and our commitments, maybe, and just go, you know what? We're going to begin to tackle these initiatives for 2024. So all I'm asking you to do is ask, what part does God want you to play? And then I want you to do one more thing. Put that prayer back up that Nehemiah prayed. Take a picture of this or get it out, off the app. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in your name. Now this next part, I pray this prayer or some form of this prayer almost every day when I get up. Give us success today by granting us favor in order to accomplish what you've called us to do. Every morning I get up. I don't know what's going to happen that morning, but I pray that prayer. God, give me favor and give me success so I can choose your way, so I can accomplish what you've called us to do. So God, that's what we're asking for. We're asking for favor. We're asking so that we can be successful and that we would have favor with you. We would have favor with other ministries that we work with. We'd have favor with people who just have a heart to reach young people who have a heart to develop leaders. So this morning, we're asking that you hear the prayer of your servants who revere your name, who honor your name, who've come here and have decided to choose your way, whether it's sitting and listening or loaning in your boat or taking your fishing. We've chosen to go your way, and we're asking God that you give us favor and make our way successful. In Jesus' name, amen.